students. And so I'm going to make a couple of comments on that as we go along. And since I am a professor, I'll try to teach you something tonight, and don't worry. Okay, so we'll start off with how did my group, which we call the Ocean Circulation Group, how did we respond, and how did we interact with other people in that response, and what are some of the lessons learned? I'll conclude with that. Well, we were able to respond because we had in place a coordinated program of observations and models of the coastal ocean. And so this is a cartoon, and on the left you see a whole bunch of different instruments and instrument delivery systems like buoys and what we call gliders and profilers and drifters. We had all this stuff, and we were using it, and so we were able to apply it to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We also had models in place. We were running, and we still do run, what we call nowcast forecast models, just like weather models, but they're for the ocean circulation as opposed to the winds. And so on the right, you see output from one of those models. They're all on the internet. And so we had in place the tools to engage immediately, and we did engage immediately. And so what we did is we started tracking the location of the oil and forecasting where that oil would go every day. And our forecasts were 3.5 days into the future using forecast winds that we got from NOAA and the models that we were running. And then, at least on a weekly basis, actually at times it was a daily basis, I would put together these PowerPoint briefings that I'd send off to the agencies and to others in the state of Florida that I thought would find these valuable. And I'm going to kind of talk it off of an excerpt of one of these PowerPoints as we go along. And so the first thing I would do is explain exactly what we were doing. And so we applied 6 different ocean circulation models to actually track oil at the surface. And those are the 6 that are listed. The top one is the one that we actually run here. And the others consist of 3 different models that the Navy runs, one by NOAA and one by a former student of mine who's at NC State. And so every day we would initialize the location of the oil through analyses of satellite imagery, and my colleague Chuan Hu is expert at that. So he would provide the location of the oil. We would initialize the model with that location, and then we project forward to 3.5 days where that oil would go. And recognizing that all models have errors, we used 6 different ones and looked at an ensemble of results to try to get a feeling for just how good they may be. And it turns out, as you were told earlier, these forecasts were used almost immediately by NOAA. And if you look at any of their daily forecast maps, you'll see that we were acknowledged second only to them. Rumor had it that the guy who was actually doing it would have liked to have put ours first, but he couldn't. We also supplemented this with actual observations because it's difficult to interpret why things are doing what they're doing. And so we had to look at all the information we possibly had. And we made everything available publicly on the internet. We would then give a forecast update. We would kind of talk about what was going on. And we'd start off by the fact that the ocean circulation determines where the oil may go. And we also talked about the fact that deep ocean currents behave differently than coastal currents. It's very difficult to take something that's in deep water, so over depth that deep, and squish it up into something that might be relative in a depth that deep. And so when you're in deep water, you tend to stay in deep water. So oil was in deep water. The well was at 1,500 feet of depth. And the oil really didn't want to get to the beach. But with time it did. In fact, it took about a month and a half for oil to get to Pensacola. And then, for reasons I'll tell you in a bit, it only took about less than a week for that oil to almost go past Cape San Blas once it got into shallow water. The first of the beaches to be oiled were the beaches around the bird split, so the Louisiana beaches. Why? Because they were in closest proximity to deep water, and so it didn't take much to get the oil there. The next beach to be oiled actually was in the vicinity of Pensacola, because DeSoto Canyon is relatively deep, and that comes within 30 miles of Pensacola. And then once the oil got into shallow water, in the vicinity of Pensacola, it then went farther west towards Mississippi and farther east towards other beaches of Florida. So I was trying to explain these things in a way that people could actually understand, and hopefully you're understanding that here. So the movement along the coast, once it started moving along the coast, was due to two things, and they were sometimes competing things. The wind tending to blow the water in a certain direction, and the larger scale ocean currents, as influenced in particular by the Gulf of Mexico loop current, that also tried to influence the movement of the water. So we had to keep track of these two competing influences to understand why oil was going where it was going. Here's an example of the predictions we were putting out. This happened to be a model initialized on the 10th of July and forecast through the 14th of July. 4 different renditions. The top left is the one we run here, and the others are a couple of the Navy models plus my students at NC State. And they all gave fairly similar results, somewhat different, but fairly similar. And as I said, all models have errors, and so you really do need to look at an ensemble. Just like for hurricane landfall prediction, you're now used to these spaghetti diagrams, as they call them, and kind of take the average of these, and that's the likely place of landfall. Then we would have to look at this loop current, Florida current, Gulf Stream system in detail, because that is really a 500-pound gorilla in the Gulf of Mexico. It provides the connectivity between the Caribbean and the southeast United States. It flows into the Gulf of Mexico through the Yucatan Strait, out through the Florida Straits, and then up the east coast is the Gulf Stream. And at the start of this oil spill, the loop current was as far north as the latitude of Tampa Bay. And it was in process of going farther and farther north. And in fact, many of us thought that it would actually get right up to the wellhead, which it's done many times in the past. But what happened happened on May 20th, in fact, the loop current shed what we call an eddy. And once that happened, the connection between the location of the wellhead and the Florida Straits was broken. Prior to that, some oil had gotten into the loop current, and a very small amount of oil actually did flow through the Florida Straits and up the east coast, in fact, but it was relatively minor because that connection was broken. So Florida really lucked out, and had that connection not been broken, we would have seen oil in the vicinity of the Keys and oil up the east coast. It didn't happen. So I'll give you an idea so you can see what I'm talking about. The left-hand panel is the loop current on May 9th. And we do this from satellite imagery. This is a product that my group produces on a daily basis, and it's on the internet. And so you can see on May 9th where the loop current was extending to, and it wasn't too far from the oil. And in fact, some oil was getting entrained into the loop current at that time. The right-hand panel is a rendition on July 5th, and the eddy had broken off, and you can see there's no longer a direct connection between where the oil was and points farther south. So we were quite lucky. If it ever happens again, we may not be so lucky. Here's a demonstration of oil that's taken by an aerial photograph from an airplane, and it's in the loop current. And that oil did begin to circulate, and some of it actually did make it through the Florida Straits. But it was a small amount, didn't have any major impact. This is the situation now. And so this is also from the internet. You can all get access to this. What it shows is the pathway right now being taken by water flowing through the Yucatan, and then out the Florida Straits and up the east coast of the Gulf Stream. And you can see that there is no connection to where the oil was, but the loop current is beginning to progress farther north, and eventually it will be up there. So it's a good thing there's no oil flowing right now. What's important to recognize is that if we analyze,